Surely, surely you don't want anyone to find out the things that you have done. Surely.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Coffee with Crime podcast. I'm Brittany, and I'm happy to have you here. So, I cannot believe it, but I already have another video dedicated to the Micah Francis case, and this has been made possible because John Paul cannot stop talking and providing us with so much content to examine. So, as you probably have seen, JP has done another interview, this time with News Nation, and wow. It is a roller coaster to not only listen to, but also to watch his behaviors. So, before I got my master's in nursing, I actually did receive a bachelor's in psychology, and a few of my favorite classes were those regarding behavior analysis. And so, by no means am I an expert at analyzing behaviors, but I did pick up a few skills along the way, and well, really both in my psychology education and in my nursing experience, analyzing behaviors became a very useful skill. And wow, this interview JP did with News Nation, there is so much to analyze. So between some of JP's statements, some of his mannerisms, inconsistencies in the things that he says, there is a ton to unpack here. And I'll just give you my opinion right up front before we even get into it. I think that JP is lying a lot throughout this interview. My question is why? Is he trying to cover up something, make himself look better, make Micah look mentally unwell? Is JP a pathological liar? I think these are all very valid questions. So in today's episode, I want to go over a few specific parts of the interview and highlight his various behaviors that I believe represent lying. One thing to note is that we're not looking for only one symptom of lying. Instead, we're looking for multiple different symptoms. So essentially, the more that are present, the more likelihood that JP is lying. So right away, I will say for basically the entirety of the interview, JP appears to be doing pacifying behaviors. So sort of like rubbing his hands or the tissue, I guess, in his hands, always touching his face. If you watch for it, you cannot not see it. He does this all the time. And these are considered self-soothing behaviors. They usually indicate that somebody is experiencing stress. So aside from these nonstop pacifying behaviors, I want to look at how JP answers some of these specific questions that are asked. So in the first clip, JP goes on to talk about how if any of Micah's family members would have noticed how allegedly mentally ill she was and took her to see a professional, they would have been able to help her and essentially save her. And immediately I noticed some inconsistencies here in the things that JP was saying.
If someone thought I need to take her to a professional, that professional would have known that she needed medicine. And the reason I know that's true is because I took her a few weeks before she passed away. I took her to probate court, and in 3 minutes' time, they said your wife is mentally ill and she needs medicine desperately. And I said, okay, let's do it. Let's get her the medicine. Let's get her help. And they said she's not a danger to anybody in society, so we can't force her to do it. But if one of her family members or friends had taken note of the way she was acting and seen what was happening to her physically and taken her to just one professional, they could have saved her life.
So like I said, there are definitely some inconsistencies in these statements because I want you to think about what he's saying. JP says that he took Micah to probate court, and in 3 minutes, they were able to say Micah is mentally ill and that she needs medication, but that they couldn't intervene because she was not a danger to society. And then he immediately goes on to say, but if anyone in her family would have noticed how mentally unwell she was and took her to see a professional, then they could have helped her. But he just admitted that he took her to get evaluated and the professionals didn't help Micah then. So why would they have allegedly intervened if Micah's family took her to be evaluated? It doesn't make any sense what he's saying. And also, like I've mentioned, I worked as an ER nurse for years, and the mental health population, it is huge. Quite often, patients would be petitioned because they were a danger to others and also a danger to themselves. A patient does not only have to be a danger to society, they can absolutely be petitioned for a psychiatric hold if they are deemed a danger to themselves. So what he's saying is inaccurate and it doesn't add up. If the courts had seen and thought that she was actually a danger to herself, they would have stepped in and she would have been petitioned. So in the next clip I want to look at, the interviewer asked JP, what did the detective tell you? And this is in reference to what the detective told JP the night of Micah's passing. And his response here has a lot of details that stand out to me.
And so I called a police chief that I know somewhere around here, captain or somebody, and that person told me that it was real as well. I remember screaming really loud and throwing up everywhere.
What did they tell you?
I remember throwing up. Did I have spaghetti that day? It was a lot of throw up. It was something red. I'm sorry?
What did they tell you?
I don't remember that. Oh, no, I don't remember that. Hold on. I don't remember. He said, my family member called the hospital and spoke to, I think, either the head nurse or medical examiner or somebody. And that lady read me stuff that the Robinson County, I guess, had wrote on a piece of paper. And she was reading me suicide and the weapon and where it was at and all these different facts. Because the detective would not tell me it was suicide. And then I called him back and told him what the hospital told me. And he was pissed off and asked me who that lady's name was. And I didn't know her name. And if I did know, I wasn't going to tell him anyway, because I'm glad she told me.
So initially, JP fails to answer the question, and he just randomly shares details about throwing up spaghetti the evening that he found out about Micah. It was extremely odd and out of place. And yeah, so right away, lots of red flags. He doesn't answer the question, and he shares irrelevant details. I do also have some questions regarding his statements about the nurse telling him details of the incident over the phone and how she shared allegedly reports from the police. Now, it is possible that this is true, but I definitely question this because in this circumstance, I would think that the nurse would not be sharing these details over the phone, especially if there was any kind of question of whether or not there was foul play involved. So to me, he is hiding something here because the way that he responds to this, it's not adding up. And there are, again, like I said, multiple red flags. My intuition regarding this is that JP knew about Micah's passing and that it was going to be ruled a self-unaliving before the detective told him. And so an easy scapegoat for him was to say that a nurse told him, and conveniently, he wouldn't name the nurse. And of course, he kind of spins it like, well, he wouldn't name the nurse because he was trying to protect her. But I don't believe that. I think that JP already knew the situation and the circumstances surrounding Micah's death. What do you guys think? Do you think he's hiding something about how he found out about Micah? Do you think he already knew something happened to her before the detectives called him? I would love to hear your opinion on this. So in the next clip, the interviewer asked JP, so in other words, it all adds up to you. And so this is in regards to whether or not JP believes the details surrounding Micah's passing and if they add up to him. And initially, JP fails to answer this question. This should have been an easy answer. Yes, it all adds up to me. Or no, if that were the case. Instead, he starts out with, well, I'm not a detective, and goes on to say, if she had heart surgery, I'm not going to question the heart surgeon. So these are what's considered non-answer statements.
In other words, it all added up to you. It made sense to you.
I mean, I'm not a detective. If she had heart surgery, I'm not going to question the heart surgeon. I don't know anything about detective work at all.
Right, but it's your wife. I mean, and them telling you her life has ended.
And then look at what happens. JP becomes very defensive.
Are you trying to ask me if I think somebody murdered her?
Do you think anybody murdered her?
No.
And I found this part interesting because to me, it seems like JP got very defensive towards the interviewer as if he was accusing JP of murder when he wasn't. He was simply asking JP if he thought the circumstances surrounding Micah's death added up to him. If it added up to him, then he should have simply replied yes. But when someone becomes defensive towards something that in itself is not accusatory, this can be a red flag for dishonesty and for guilt. In this next clip, the interviewer asked JP, would you characterize your relationship with Micah as healthy? So JP starts out his answer with laughing. And I mean, context is really important here. If the situation were different, fine. But in this circumstance, it is oddly inappropriate. Because let's think about what we know. Micah and JP were estranged before Micah passed. Micah had served JP with divorce papers. Micah had made multiple police reports regarding JP's alleged abusive behaviors. There were infidelities, and of course, Micah passed away. And so I think anyone would assume that no, their relationship was not healthy.
Would you characterize your relationship with Micah as healthy?
Oh man, when she was on her medicine, we had the greatest marriage you could ever imagine. We spent every day together. I don't know any other couple that spends every day. So we wake up, well, she'd kind of wake up before me, but we'd go work out together every day, 5 days a week. We'd eat lunch together every day. We would work together. Then every night we would have our routine. So there's 3 things we would do. We would either sit in the bathtub together for 2 hours until the water went from steaming hot to ice cold. She bought this big air mattress we'd put in the back of the truck, and we'd go park somewhere here in Myrtle Beach where there's no lights, and she'd bring us some hot chocolate, and we'd lay on the air mattress for 2 hours. Or we would go out on the beach with our beach blanket and lay there for 2 hours. Just her and I. She would talk 90% of the time. I would talk 10% of the time, and I would just listen. And so, was our marriage healthy? It's probably as healthy as any other American marriage.
So when JP is asked if his marriage was healthy and he laughs, I find it really bizarre. It's almost like the question is funny to him because of the irony in it. He knows that their relationship was unhealthy, even though he would not admit it. JP actually answers this by offering a qualifying response. Well, he says when Micah was on her medicine, as if that was the sole determining factor of whether or not their marriage was healthy. Also, his mannerisms absolutely stand out here to me as well. He's extremely fidgety, the speed of his talking gets faster, and he kind of goes on this tangent. Again, he's giving way too many details and trying to paint this narrative like everything is perfect or was perfect as long as Micah was on lithium. And just watching him and listening to him, I think most people would even intuitively interpret him as lying. Talking about, his idealistic marriage where they spend every night together at least 2 hours of undivided attention in a tub or under the stars. And it's just very inconsistent with the facts that we know to be true. In this next clip, the interviewer asks, would you do anything different? And do you feel any part responsible? JP's behavior here in response to this question has so many red flags. First, again, he starts off with non-answer statements, saying, wow, that's such a good question. Man, that's a good question. Of course, this buys JP time while he considers how he wants to answer. And then notice he doesn't even answer the entire question. Instead, he only responds to the would you do anything different part.
Do you feel that you did anything that you would change? Do you feel any part responsible?
God, that's a great question. Man, that's such a good question. Wow, what a good question. Can I have a second to think about it?
Sure.
Okay. Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. What would I do differently? Oh man. I know what I do. I would not involve her family when she's having mental episodes and is schizophrenic and is off her meds. I would never have texted them.
So yeah, as you can see, JP's behavior here is extremely odd. And again, I think just intuition alone would tell most people that he seems to be acting off and not being truthful. Also notice he does not answer the question if he feels responsible for what happened with Micah. I did even listen to the unedited version just to confirm whether or not he answers this, and he does not answer that part of the question at all. He only says what he would do different, which, classic JP, he somehow twists his answer to place the blame on others again. So the thing that he would do different is to not tell her family because they did everything wrong, not him. It kind of reminds me of how, like in a job interview, when they ask you, what's one of your weaknesses? And you say something like, oh, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, because you don't want to look bad or admit to any actual real weaknesses because you're trying to get a job. Well, I feel like JP basically answers every question like this. He never does any wrong, and when he does, sort of admit any kind of blame. He only admits to involving Micah's family, which then they did wrong, not him. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? John Paul never takes any blame for anything. And so like I said, I did listen to the unedited version and to see if they maybe cut something out here in regards to the question about him taking any responsibility, and he completely avoids the question. Instead, he goes on to talk about like playing with her hair and just like these odd details to avoid the actual question. And so I wish personally that the interviewer would have pushed on this topic a bit more, because I really would have liked to hear this better addressed. And finally, this video would be a miss if we didn't go over JP's response to being questioned about the extremely bizarre video that surfaced with him rolling around in the grass saying that he took too many pills. Let's watch this clip and we can see what red flags we notice.
One of the videos that has surfaced recently is from years ago, and I'm sure you know what it is. It's you're sitting face down on the ground and you're freaking out, and you're talking about, you're literally squealing about being eaten by ants, taking the wrong meds.
Ants biting me everywhere. Is your medication something they gave you?
I mean, for viewers, for people watching it, the common thought is, what is going on here, and do you have a drug problem?
So I fell out of a tree, a giant magnolia tree. It was like 300 years old. I broke 12 bones. It was 10 to 12 bones. I don't know if you count fingers. Yeah, it is count fingers. Anyway, I have all this metal in my body, and I'd never taken pain meds in my life, and I just had my body cast taken off, and so I took a little bit too much pain meds that day.
That's it.
That's it. It was 2017, 2016, and it was like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever, and I was missing my family. My wife, Micah, and I, we started through an affair, and so we were both married to people, and then we got divorced, and I was missing my family because I'd lost my family at the time, and I was on pain meds, and it just all went together. But fell out of a tree, broke a bunch of bones, took too many pain meds. That was that story.
So first he says, I fell out of a tree, a giant magnolia tree. It was like 300 years old. And so already, again, he's being overly specific and sharing a lot of unnecessary details, which again, this can be a sign of lying. It helps the person to buy time to think of how they want to answer something. Also, a person can do this to try and appear extremely open about a topic, like they're willing to share any and all details, when really they're not sharing the most important details that matter. And then also notice, he doesn't say what he was doing in the tree that he fell out of. I wonder. He then goes on to talk about how many bones he broke. And he kind of babbles, was it 10? Was it 12 bones? I don't know. Do you count fingers? Yeah, you should count fingers. I had metal in my body and I just got my body cast off. So he rambles again. And then he suddenly says, I had never taken pain meds in my life and I took too many pain meds that day. So a very long-winded way to say that he took too many pain meds. There are some inconsistencies here, and I want you to think about it. If he had just gotten his body cast off, then he was already well into his recovery, meaning that this was not the first time that he had taken pain medication. He had likely already been taking them and was actually more likely to be supposed to have been weaned off by them. So I'm now a practicing nurse practitioner, and we always aim to have our patients on the lowest dosage of pain meds for the shortest amount of time, and that's to avoid things like addiction and withdrawal. So my point being here is this day was not the first time that he took pain medication, and he knew how they affected him. So I believe he either knowingly took more than he was supposed to, or this was some kind of like psychotic break. It also could be a bit of both. And let's go back to the report made from this day, because we have documentation to compare this to, and we can notice some inconsistencies there. So this is a report from Allison Williams, who was John Paul's first wife. And this is in regards to the circumstance when he was rolling around in the grass. And so it says, on March 6, 2016, the victim reported that the offender constantly stalks and harasses her. The victim said the offender is her, blacked out, but it says ex-husband. And since their breakup, the offender will not leave the victim alone. The victim said the offender comes to her job, her new church, and very often to her home. The victim says the offender uses, I believe it says, their children for an excuse to see her, and the victim feels the offender comes to her home when she is not there. Several months ago, a reporting officer responded to the victim's residence at the request of her father, who stated that the offender was laying in the victim's front yard. The victim was not home at that time. At that time, the offender appeared to be under the influence of something, and rescue was notified to respond. The offender refused treatment and said that maybe he got his medication mixed up and took his sleeping pills instead of his other medications. A few months later, the offender was at the victim's residence wanting to take, I'm assuming it says one of the children, for ice cream, but the victim refused to let that child go because the offender was injured and taking medication. The victim said the offender was in no shape to drive and it was not safe to let that child go with the offender. The reporting officer responded to that incident as well and did determine that it was not safe for the offender to take whatever child. So here you can see he says in this report that he actually thinks that he maybe switched his medication and accidentally took a sleeping medication. And then even there was a separate incident where both his wife and the responding officer noticed that he was not safe to take, again, like I said, I'm assuming the children. So this was not an isolated incident. It seems like he was taking too many pain medications or whatever on more than one occasion. And then I'm going to read a little bit of this second page too. The victim said, since those prior incidents, there have been many more, such as the offender coming to the victim's new job, bringing, I'm assuming, a child with him when he has visitation, and telling the victim that the child wanted to see her. So using the kid basically to get to see his ex-wife. The victim has custody of the children and is with them most of the time. The victim said that she has chose a new church separate from the offender. I'm assuming it says the name of whatever church that was. And since she has chose a new church, she says the offender has gone to her church and asked the counselor for counseling. In addition to going to the victim's job and church, the victim said the offender texts and calls her constantly and has been begging the victim to spend 40 days and 40 nights with him without interference. The offender told the victim that it is God's will for him to move back into the victim's house. The victim has refused to allow the offender into her home to stay and says she has no desire for the offender to ever move in with her. Within the past month, the victim said the offender has moved into a house directly across the pond and in front of the victim's house. Like, this is absolutely bat crazy. And since the offender has moved across the pond from the victim said the offender will call or text and tell the victim that he sees her when she leaves and comes home, and that the offender also lets the victim know when he sees that the victim has company. So actually stalking her just like he stalked and harassed Micah. But this is interesting. Listen to this. The victim said that the offender told her the only thing blocking his view and not allowing the offender to have complete visual access to the front of the victim's residence is a magnolia tree that is planted in the middle of the cul-de-sac.
I fell out of a tree, a giant magnolia tree.
Could that be the same magnolia tree that he fell out of? The victim has said that she has noticed several times a white substance spread around the base of the tree and has realized that the substance is Epsom salt. The victim feels sure that the offender is placing the large amount of salt around the tree in an effort to kill the tree. The victim said that the reason she believes the offender is the one responsible for the salt is because he used the same technique to kill a few trees that were on the property where his church is. The victim has recently had video surveillance system placed on her residence and said that she would advise reporting officer of any video evidence of the offender stalking around her residence or intentionally causing damage to the large tree. The victim said the offender's reason for wanting to destroy the tree is so that he can fully see the front of the victim's residence. The man is crazy. My gut says that he fell out of the magnolia tree trying to stalk and spy on his first wife because he is so mentally unwell. John Paul, that is. The mentally sick one. JP. Pastor JP. And he has the audacity to talk about Micah's mental health. The man needs some serious help. And then, just for a little comedic relief, I want to watch how he talks about how if he's ever done illegal drugs.
Not hallucinogenics.
Not, what would hallucinate be?
Make you hallucinate.
Well, what makes you hallucinate?
Drugs.
Like illegal drugs? Oh, I've never done illegal drug my whole life.
Okay.
Well, oh crap, that was a lie. I'm sorry, that was a lie. When I was 16 years old, one time I was in a truck with two of my friends, and they were both smoking pot. I didn't smoke any, but they do a thing called hot box, and so I got some of that. And I tried steroids one time.
Okay, no, really. Anyone that's watching this, did any of you believe a word that man just said? Obviously lying. Obviously. He literally plays stupid when he talks about hallucinogenics. And then he audibly pauses when he says that he never did illegal drugs. And he's like, oh, wait. I actually was in a car being hotboxed before.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale, and never tried it again.
It's so unbelievable. It's actually laughable. And then at the end, how he just like nonchalantly throws in there, oh, and I did steroids once. Like, what? What a super bizarre answer from John Paul. His body language was all over the place. He was constantly rubbing his face and scratching his nose, almost seeming like he was either on some sort of stimulant. It also could be, though, a symptom of lying and self-soothing. It could even be a symptom of mania. But there are so many inconsistencies in the statements that John Paul makes. He gets defensive, he's overly specific with details that don't matter, and avoids answering certain questions altogether. Cluster these, and I'd say that the likelihood of John Paul being dishonest throughout this interview is extremely high. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, I wish you guys nothing but the best. I hope that wherever you are happy, you are healthy, you are well. And until next time, bye guys.